In the past 2 weeks, I have been deeply touched by the gift of hospitality. First, I want to thank Father Jim, especially, for welcoming me into his home. I'm now a resident of our local rectory here, and it's been a great joy. In just having moved in 2 days ago, I've already received great love, good food, and a warm welcome. I also want to thank him for giving me 2 weeks from the moment I finished my studies. I had this big exam on June 27th until moving in for time for retreat and time to hang out with family for a little bit of vacation. And on my retreat, I went to Austria. And there's this Benedictine monastery in Austria that welcomed me very warmly. They did so in such a way that I can only sum up with one word: Apfelstrudel. They're very good to me. They opened their home, and this is actually a charism of the Benedictine order, to welcome others as if they were welcoming Christ. And I felt just that. I felt very welcomed. I who was a stranger to them, was given very much Apfelstrudel. And hospitality is a very powerful way of practicing Christian charity, by welcoming others into our lives. And it can happen in very deep ways, as we hear in the first reading today, or even in simple moments of our life. We can welcome people in a moment of hospitality. Now, Abraham, in the first reading, brings his hospitality A game as he welcomes these three mysterious guests. And I sum up the way he welcomed them in these three words: urgency, totality, and indifference. And what I mean by that, first, in urgency, one, we hear that it's at the hottest part of the day. He's sitting by the entrance of his tent. But when he sees these guests, he runs to greet them. He then runs to his wife, Sarah, in the tent and says, "Quick!" The first word he says is "quick." There's this urgency about welcoming them and letting these people know that they're very welcome to be there. And then he does quickly proceed to welcome them. And then the second is totality. He says, let's get water so you can bathe your feet. Let's put you in the shade so that you can rest. And let's prepare you a good meal to eat. So there's this beautiful just totality in the way that they're welcomed. There's nothing lacking in the welcome that Abraham offers. And he does this in what I call indifference, that is, to who they are, to what their identity is, which he, in fact, doesn't know much about, the text leads us to believe. The text says nothing about their identities, where they come from, what their intentions are, and why they're there. They're total strangers, foreigners. Yet Abraham opens his home life to them without asking any questions. The most intimate part of his life, that of the home, is what he invites them into. So this scene of welcome sets the stage for our expectations of what hospitality should look like. And Abraham sets the bar pretty high. But then the climax in the liturgy of the word today happens in the gospel. A moment of hospitality, of welcoming Jesus into a home. And it sort of breaks our expectations the way the scene carries out what Jesus teaches about hospitality. Martha, of course, is following the example of Abraham. It simply says she's burdened with many tasks. But we can come to believe that she is giving herself totally, and she's being urgent about it. She wants the Lord to feel so welcome in that place. But as we know, the Lord says, Mary has chosen the better part. So we have to take a look at what Mary's doing, because Jesus is pointing to that very action. What did Mary choose? To listen to him speak. I'd like to call this a hospitality of the heart. The power of listening is great. When we open our ears, and therefore in such a way open our hearts to hearing what another has to say, there's this great act of hospitality happening. this moment of welcoming another into our lives, into an intimate part of ourselves, our hearts, by giving an ear to another. Now, listening in general, of course, is extremely important. And Pope Francis, even these days, is highlighting this importance in his synodal process. The church is looking at itself and seeing, okay, what does the church need to do to be its best self in the world today? And he says, the church needs to listen. We need to listen to each other, where we're all at. We need to listen to the world and its needs. And we even need to listen to ourselves and see how the Lord is calling us and what our needs are within the church. So listening is very important, and Pope Francis shows this importance. But particularly, Mary is listening to a person who is the Son of God. And beautifully, this is something that we can do today. The hospitality of the heart that we can offer to the Lord is giving our ear and our heart to Him. Because when you listen to Jesus, you're allowing Him to dwell within you. And that's what St. Paul is talking about in his reading, his letter to the Colossians. He says, I'm preaching a mystery to you, and that is Christ in you. What a mystery, that Christ can dwell in us. Well, if Christ can live in us who are homes, the door to open that home is the ear. And that's how we can let the Lord in. And the fact is that Jesus wants to dwell in each one of us. He wants to find a home here. The parallel of showing how Mary listening and Martha offering hospitable welcome and service show that in listening there is a hospitality happening, the hospitality of the heart, the place where Jesus wants to dwell. He who is the Word which became flesh, the same Word which, when two pilgrims were on the way to Emmaus, they heard Him speaking and their hearts were burning within them. The Word which is the mystery that Paul is proclaiming is Christ in you. Now listening opens the door of our hearts and allows for Christ to dwell in us. And that's what He wants. So let's let Him in. Practically speaking, He loves to speak to us in silence. When we give Him time in a quiet place, we're following His order when He says, go to your rooms and pray to your Father in secret. He also loves to speak to us with His Word, which is the Bible, in a way simply put. And every time we read it, we're preparing ourselves to encounter Him. By giving the Lord 5 minutes a day, we let Him know that He is welcome. 5 minutes in silence, listening to the voice of the Lord and using the Scriptures to do so is how we can choose the better part along with Mary and welcome the Lord. I personally like to give Him 15 minutes after lunch and 15 minutes after dinner. Not just because it's a good transition time into my post-lunch siesta, which I've become accustomed to living in Italy, but because the Lord wants to speak to us throughout all times of the day. And that's a special time when I want Him to know, Lord, I want you to be present with me now. So let's practice this hospitality of the heart right now. We've heard His word proclaimed in the Scriptures. We've welcomed Him with our own attentive listening. Thank you for listening to this homily and welcoming me and making me feel so welcome with Him among you. But now we turn to the Lord who will be present on the altar, and we bring to Him the deepest desire of our hearts. And we allow Him to feed us with the Holy Eucharist, His sacred body and blood. With an attitude of thanksgiving, gratitude, and adoration, let us approach the holy altar at this Mass and give Him a warm welcome in our very selves.
The Lord appeared to Abraham at the terebinth of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of the tent. I want to apologize right off the bat that this will be a very personal homily that I pray will make sense for your relationship with the Lord and with those who are closest to you. This past Friday morning, a good friend and fellow Marino priest, Father Jim Ebel, came to visit me. He is presently the director of the House of Prayer in Mwanza, Tanzania. He was on his way back to Marino's headquarters in New York after visiting his family in Fairfield, California, and we only had 24 hours together. Father Jim was in the first class of seminarians that I had when I came back from Tanzania to work in Marino's initial seminary formation program. There were 18 men in that first year, and Father Jim was one of the 6 men that I would work closely with throughout the year. Now, the initial year of formation was a time of discernment. So many of these men had not yet fully begun to discern their vocation to priesthood or to mission. In many ways, they were just beginning their search. Father Jim grew up in an Air Force family. His mother was Filipino, and his dad was from the hills of Tennessee. Growing up, he attended 4 different grade schools and 3 different high schools. Needless to say, he had some issues to work through. Father Jim and I have been friends ever since 1982. That's 40 years. Over his years of ministry in Tanzania, we would get together when he was on home leave. I have visited him in his family home, and he has visited me both at Assumption Parish in Bellingham and numerous times here at St. Michael Parish. And though our meetings could be years apart, there has been an easiness in our relationship that has enabled us to pick up where we left off. And this time was no exception. We prayed morning prayer Friday, then concelebrated Mass, and then shared breakfast and began to catch up with one another. A little before noon, I'd go to the office for an interview for Sacred Heart Radio. And when I returned, we talked a bit more. And because I had a late evening the night before at a fundraiser in Seattle for the Evergreen ALS Association, I needed a nap. I didn't want to be falling asleep during our conversations. Father Jim was very gracious in learning some of the daily routines that I have, like putting on and taking off my cervical collar that I wear, my gait belt to help me walk, and also the back brace that I wear when we get together for Mass. Well, early in the afternoon, we went for a short walk. And as we walked, we talked some more, picking up our conversation from the morning. Knowing that our time was short together, we did not waste time with trivialities and small talk. We dove deep every time we started our conversations. We opened our hearts and souls to each other one more time. As we returned to the rectory, we sat outside on the deck, continuing our conversation about our need for the healing of Jesus, for being vulnerable to the wounds of our lives, and how the Lord continually works in us and through the people we serve to bring about deeper interior healing, peace, and joy. As we sat in the shade, continuing our conversation, Father Jim became quiet. I just sat and waited. And he said to me, can I say something to you? Is it okay? I immediately responded, oh yeah, of course, please. He said to me, this visit has been very hard for me. I did not want to come up and see you. There was a long pause. I waited again and listened. He continued, I struggled with coming to see you because I thought this might be the last time. that I would see you alive. I did not want to face this, and I certainly did not want to tell you this. In that moment, I was overwhelmed by the presence of the Lord, and I felt much like Abraham being visited by the Lord as he sat at the entrance of his tent. Father Jim continued, all throughout my life, it has been so difficult for me to say goodbye. It just hurt too much as a kid. I had to leave people all the time. I had to protect myself. And I did so by putting on layers and layers of distancing from people because they would leave or I would leave. And all these years, you haven't left me. But I'm afraid that I may never see you alive again. And I didn't want to face that pain. Through my tears, my response was simply, I'm so very grateful, not only that you came, but that you trusted me enough to tell me. Our conversation continued for probably another hour or so before our ride came to take us to dinner. As I share my experience with you, maybe we each can ask ourselves, how attentive and open am I to the unexpected moments of the Lord showing up at the entrance of our tent? Those moments with your spouse, when you know you need to say something, to share something deep, but you're afraid to do so, afraid to be vulnerable enough. Or those moments when you feel you need to share something, but you don't know if you can trust again because you've been hurt before. Or maybe those moments of loneliness when you need to leave the safety of your tent, risking to reach out in friendship or companionship or to ask for help when you don't want to do it. And yet you know you need to. Or those moments of prayer when the Lord is so close to you and yet you feel he is so distant, so unresponsive, and so unable to feel the depth of your suffering or your pain. It is at those very moments that the Lord may be at the threshold of your tent. My sisters and brothers, as I have said so often to you, we are not meant to journey alone. We are meant to do this together, to help one another to journey to heaven together. We are meant for and made for community, where we can discover our deepest, best selves, whom God has created us to be. That's why St. Paul referred in the second reading to the body of Christ, the church. And so let us, like Abraham and Sarah, Martha and Mary, not be afraid to welcome Jesus into our hearts, our relationships, our homes, and into our deepest needs and wounds.